Kaela lived her life by the rhythms of the earth. Her world was the small, secluded village of Heatherglen, a cluster of stone and thatch cottages nestled in a valley so remote it was a myth on most maps. Here she was not just a woman, she was a necessity. Her hands, stained with the green of herbs and the dark purple of berries, could soothe a fever, set a bone, and coax a struggling babe into its first breath. Her hair was the color of rich soil after a rain, and her eyes, a clear, steady green, held a wisdom that belied her 22 years. She was the village healer, a role passed down from her grandmother, and her heart was woven into the fabric of her community like the strongest thread. Life was simple, but it was good. It tasted of fresh-baked bread, smelled of wood smoke on the crisp mountain air, and felt like the solid warmth of a neighbor's hand in hers. But in the past year, a shadow had begun to stretch over their peaceful existence. It came in the form of whispers, carried by the few traders, brave enough to make the journey to their valley. Whispers of the Lycan King, Valerius. They said he was a conqueror, a brute who had carved out his kingdom with claw and fang, uniting the warring werewolf packs under his iron-fisted rule. They said his warriors, the Obsidian Guard, were as merciless as their king, leaving only submission or ash in their wake. For a long time, the stories were just that, frightening tales told around the hearth on a winter's night. But then the kingdom's borders began to expand, creeping ever closer, swallowing the free lands like a relentless tide. Fear, an unfamiliar and unwelcome guest, began to settle in the hearts of her people. This afternoon, Kaela was in the high meadows, the place she felt most at home. The air was sweet with the scent of the wild heather that gave their village its name, and a gentle breeze tugged at the loose braids of her hair. She knelt, her fingers gently tracing the stem of a rare sun petal flower, its delicate golden head a potent remedy for sleep sickness. Her work was a quiet meditation, a conversation with the land that provided for them. It was a scent that first alerted her that something was wrong. It was alien and sharp, cutting through the familiar fragrances of the meadow. It smelled of steel, sweat, and something else. Something wild and predatory that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She rose slowly, her basket of herbs clutched in her hand. Below, at the edge of the valley, a dark line of figures on horseback was approaching her village. They were too many, and they moved with a disciplined purpose that was not that of a trading party. Her blood ran cold. The Obsidian Guard. Panic, sharp and blinding, seized her. Her first instinct was to run, to hide, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. Her gaze was fixed on her village, on the cottages that held everyone she had ever known, everyone she loved. They were farmers and weavers, not warriors. They stood no chance. The stories were no longer just stories. The shadow had reached their doorstep. Forgetting the precious flowers in her basket, Kaela began to run, not away from the danger, but towards it, towards her home. Her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She didn't know what she could do, but she knew she could not let her people face this alone. Chapter 2. The King's Decree. By the time Kaela reached the edge of the village, the Obsidian Guard had already arrived. They were a terrifying sight. A dozen warriors clad in black leather armor and steel, their faces grim and unyielding. They sat upon massive war horses that snorted impatiently, their presence a stark violation of the village's peace. The villagers had gathered in the central square, huddled together like frightened sheep, their faces pale with fear. Kaela pushed through the crowd, her neighbors parting for her, their eyes looking to her for reassurance she did not feel. She came to stand before the village elder, a kind old man named Thomas, who was facing the guard's leader. The leader was a beta, his rank denoted by the silver wolf clasp on his cloak. He was a mountain of a man with a scarred face and cold gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "We are a peaceful people," Thomas was saying, his voice trembling but resolute. "We have no quarrel with the Lycan King. Take what you need, but please do not harm us. The beta captain dismounted, his heavy boots thudding on the packed earth. He did not look at Thomas. His gaze swept over the crowd, searching until it landed on Kaela. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps confirmation, passed through his eyes. He ignored the elder and took a step towards her. "Are you the healer they call Kaela?" he asked. His voice a low, gravelly rumble. Kaela's chin lifted. "I am." He unrolled a scroll he held in his gauntleted hand. "By order of the Lycan King Valerius, you are to accompany us back to the capital, the Obsidian Spire. The Luna is unwell."
"You will attend to her." The words were so unexpected they stole the air from her lungs. This wasn't a raid. They weren't here for gold or tribute. They were here for her. The absurdity of it was staggering. A human healer, summoned to the Lycan court? "I cannot," she said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "My place is here. These people need me." The captain's expression did not change, but a dangerous coldness entered his eyes. "That was not a request. It is a decree. You will come with us." "And if I refuse?" she challenged, her heart hammering. The captain's gaze slowly moved from her to the faces of the villagers, to the children clinging to their mother's skirts, to the frightened eyes of Elder Thomas. He didn't say a word, but his threat was as clear as a drawn sword. Her compliance was the price for her village's safety. The choice was not a choice at all. Tears of rage and helplessness pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not show them weakness. She looked at Thomas, at the silent, desperate plea in his eyes, and gave a single, jerky nod. A wave of sorrow and fear washed over her as two guards moved to flank her, their presence a cage of steel. She was allowed a single, hurried farewell, her arms wrapping around Thomas and the weeping women who had been her friends since birth. They pressed small tokens into her hands, a carved bird, a pouch of her favorite tea, small pieces of a home she feared she would never see again. As they placed her on a horse and led her away from the valley, Kaela did not look back. She couldn't bear to see the life she was being forced to leave behind. Chapter 3: The Fortress of Shadows. The journey to the Obsidian Spire was a blur of grim, silent travel. Kaela rode in the center of the Lycan guards, a prisoner in all but name. They treated her with a strange, detached care, ensuring she was fed and watered like a prized mare, but speaking to her only in curt commands. After 3 days of relentless riding, they crested a high mountain pass, and she saw it. The capital was not a city, it was a wound. A massive black fortress of volcanic rock and sharpened steel, it clawed at the sky, a monument to brutal strength and conquest. It seemed to absorb the very light around it, casting the entire landscape into a permanent state of twilight. As they passed through the immense iron gates, the sounds of the living world, the wind, the birds, died away, replaced by the clang of steel and the low growl of Lycan voices. The luxury within the fortress was as oppressive as its exterior. Furs of exotic beasts lined the cold stone floors, and massive tapestries depicting bloody battles hung on the walls. But there was no art, no music, no laughter. It was a gilded cage, filled with the scent of power and fear. She was led through winding corridors to the royal wing and ushered into a vast, silent chamber. The air here was heavy with the scent of sickness and expensive, cloying incense. In the center of the room, on a massive bed draped in black silk, lay the Luna. She was ethereally beautiful, with hair like spun moonlight and skin as pale as porcelain. But she was fading. Her breaths were shallow, almost imperceptible, and her skin, upon closer inspection, was coated in a faint, shimmering dust, like crushed silver. Kaela's fear was momentarily eclipsed by the instinct that defined her. This was a patient. This was her purpose. She approached the bed, ignoring the 2 imposing guards at the door. "I need warm water, clean linen, and a list of all the remedies you have tried," she said, her voice steady and professional. One of the guards hesitated, then gave a curt nod and departed. Kaela gently took the Luna's wrist. Her pulse was a faint, thready flutter, like a trapped bird's wing. The silver dust on her skin was cool to the touch and felt unnatural, almost metallic. Kaela had seen every known ailment in the 5 kingdoms, from the common swamp fever to the rare weeping plague. This was none of them. As she leaned closer, she caught another scent beneath the incense, hidden and faint. It was the scent of nightshade, but twisted, altered by something she couldn't identify. A cold dread settled in her stomach. This was no natural illness. This was poison. And she, a simple human healer, had just been brought to the heart of a den of wolves to cure it. Chapter 4. The King in Winter. Kaela was so engrossed in her examination, her mind racing through every herbal combination and antidote she had ever learned, that she did not sense him until it was too late. The atmosphere in the room changed, growing heavy and charged, the very air seeming to crackle with an oppressive energy. A shadow fell over the bed, and a scent hit her with the force of a physical blow, the sharp, clean aroma of a pine forest in winter, the cold smell of stone after a storm, and an undercurrent of raw, untamed power that was utterly overwhelming. She rose and turned, and found herself looking at the Ruthless King. The stories had not done him justice. Valerius was not a man, he was a force of nature. He was immense, towering over her, his shoulders broad enough to block out the light from the door. His face was a harsh landscape of sharp angles and old scars, the most prominent being a jagged line that cut through his left eyebrow. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and his eyes were the color of a winter storm, a swirling, turbulent gray that held no warmth, only a chilling, predatory intelligence. He was not a brute. A brute could be outsmarted. This king was something far more dangerous. "You are the human healer," he stated, his voice a low, resonant growl that vibrated deep in her chest. It was not a question. Kaela met his stormy gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I am." He moved to the bedside, his eyes never leaving hers. He looked down at his mate, and for a fleeting instant, a crack appeared in his stone-like facade. She saw a flicker of raw, agonizing pain, so profound it was shocking. Then the mask slammed back into place. "The Lycan healers say it is a wasting sickness of the spirit," he said, his voice flat. "They have tried everything. Chants, rituals. They are fools. They are looking for a curse when they should be looking for a poison," Kaela said quietly. Valerius's head snapped back to her, his storm-gray eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Poison? My Luna? In my fortress? Who would dare?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The raw power rolling off him was suffocating. "I do not know who," Kaela replied, holding her ground. "But her symptoms, the silver dust, the weakness, the scent of altered nightshade, are not those of any known disease. It is a slow-acting poison, designed to mimic an illness and be untraceable to those unfamiliar with its composition." The king was silent for a long moment, studying her, dissecting her with his intense gaze. He was a wolf judging its prey, deciding if it was a threat, a tool, or a meal. "You are certain?" "I am." He took a step closer, crowding her, forcing her to tilt her head back to look up at him. "Then you will find the antidote. You will brew it, and you will cure her." He leaned down, his face just inches from hers, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And if you fail, if my mate fades, then I will personally ride to your precious little village of Heatherglen, and I will burn it to the ground until not even the ashes remember its name. Your life, and the lives of everyone you have ever known, now rest in those clever little hands of yours." Chapter 5. Whispers in the Stone. King Valerius's threat hung in the air long after he was gone, a toxic cloud that poisoned the atmosphere of the entire royal wing. Kaela was given everything she demanded: a private workroom filled with alchemical tools, access to the royal apothecary, and a small, adjoining chamber to rest in. But she knew she was a prisoner, her life hanging by the thinnest of threads. To assist her, the king had assigned a young Omega servant named Finn. He was a slight, nervous young man with hair the color of wheat and wide, gentle eyes that seemed to hold a deep, perpetual sadness. He was terrified of everything, especially the king, and he scurried about his duties, flinching at every loud noise. Yet, there was a kindness in him that Kaela found herself clinging to, a small spot of warmth in the oppressive cold of the fortress. "These are all the herbs from the royal garden, my lady," he whispered one afternoon, placing a carefully arranged basket on her worktable. His hands trembled slightly. Kaela offered him a small, reassuring smile. "Thank you, Finn. You are a great help." Her kindness seemed to startle him, as if it were a foreign concept. As she sorted through the herbs, her healer's mind cataloguing and assessing, she noticed something odd. The castle's gardens grew a startling number of poisonous plants alongside the medicinal ones. "Why so much wolfsbane and hemlock?" she asked casually. Finn fidgeted with the hem of his tunic. The Shadowfen pack brought them as a diplomatic gift last month, my lady. A token of respect for the king's knowledge of all things, both healing and the other. Kaela froze, a sprig of lavender halfway to her sorting bowl. The Shadowfen pack. A rival territory. The Luna. When did she first fall ill? Finn's eyes widened, as if he had said too much. It was about a week after their visit, he stammered. The king has been harder since then. More angry. He does not sleep. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying certainty. This was no random attack. This was a political assassination, a poisoned dart aimed at the heart of the Lycan kingdom. The Luna was the target, but the king was the true victim. By slowly killing the one person he loved, the Shadowfen pack sought to weaken and distract him, leaving him vulnerable. Kaela dismissed the trembling Omega and turned her attention back to the basket of herbs he had brought. Her fingers sifted through the green leaves until they brushed against something dark and velvety. She pulled it out. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a single, perfect blossom of shadow dusk, a rare and magically potent herb. By itself, it was harmless. But combined with nightshade and bound by a specific alchemical process, it became the key component of a legendary poison known as the Silver Sleep, a poison that slowly coated the victim's skin in a fine, metallic dust as it stole their life force. She stared at the flower in her palm. It was proof. But it was also a death sentence. The assassins were not only cunning, but they had an ally inside the fortress itself. Someone had to have harvested this and put it with the other herbs. She was not just a healer in a gilded cage. She was a witness in a traitor's den, and the ruthless king whose wrath she feared was the only person who might also be able to protect her. Chapter 6. The King's Gambit. Clutching the shadow dusk blossom in her palm, Kaela felt as if she were holding a live coal. Its velvety softness was a lie, concealing a venom that could topple a kingdom. For a long, terrifying moment, she considered destroying it, pretending she had never found it. To reveal this knowledge was to paint a target on her own back. The traitor in this fortress would not hesitate to silence her, and she was a human, fragile and alone, a lamb in a den of wolves. But then the image of the Luna, pale and fading on her silken bed, rose in her mind. And beyond her, the faces of her village, their lives held hostage by the king's decree. Hiding was not an option. Her path, however dangerous, was forward. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she requested an audience with the king. Valerius received her not in the throne room, but in his private study. It was a stark, Spartan chamber dominated by a massive oak table covered in military maps. The only warmth came from a roaring fire in a cavernous hearth, which cast dancing shadows on the stone walls and glinted off the collection of weapons mounted above the mantel. He stood by the fire, his back to her, a monolith of dark, brooding power. "You have news," he stated, his voice a low rumble that was not a question. "I have a discovery," Kaela corrected, her own voice remarkably steady. She stepped forward and placed the single, dark blossom on the edge of his map-strewn table. "This was in the basket of herbs brought from your gardens." Valerius turned slowly. His stormy grey eyes fell upon the flower, and for a moment, he did not react. Then, a stillness so absolute fell over him that it was more terrifying than any roar. He recognized it. The air in the room grew thick and cold, charged with a silent, lethal fury. "Shadow dusk," he breathed, the name a curse on his lips. He looked from the flower to her, his gaze sharp enough to flay skin. "Explain." "By itself, it is mostly harmless," Kaela began, her healer's training taking over, lending her an aura of professional calm. "But when combined with altered nightshade and a silver-based catalyst, it creates a poison known as the Silver Sleep. It is ancient, complex, and designed to kill so slowly it mimics a wasting illness. The silver dust on the Luna's skin is the poison leeching her life force, binding it to the metal." She had expected rage, an explosion of the brutal power he was so famous for. Instead, he was utterly, unervingly still. He was processing, analyzing, his mind a razor-sharp weapon turning over every facet of her discovery. He was a king not just of brawn, but of terrible, cunning intellect. The Shadowfen pack brought a gift of poisonous herbs a month ago, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He was testing her, seeing if she had made the same connection. And the Luna fell ill a week later, Kaela confirmed, meeting his gaze without flinching. The timing is not a coincidence. But the Shadowfen are leagues away. The Shadow Dusk was grown here, in your own garden. They have an ally within these walls. He stared at her for a long time, the silence stretching until her nerves screamed. He was looking for a lie, for a hint of deception, for a flaw in her logic. He found none. He walked to the table and picked up the delicate flower, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger as if weighing the fate of his kingdom in its fragile petals. You have proven yourself more useful than my entire council, he said finally. His gaze flickered back to her, and she saw a sliver of something new in his eyes. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was a grudging, dangerous respect. You will tell no one of this. Not your Omega assistant, not the guards, no one. You will continue your work on the antidote. I, in turn, will find the snake in my garden. He crushed the flower in his fist, the dark petals turning to dust. And when I do, I will teach them the meaning of true poison. Chapter 7, A Fortress of Whispers. The king's discovery changed the very atmosphere of the Obsidian Spire. To the outside observer, nothing was different, but Kaela, her senses now keenly attuned to the undercurrents of the fortress, felt it immediately. The guards at her door were doubled, their faces harder, their eyes more watchful. The quiet, nervous Omega, Finn, was reassigned, replaced by a stern, silent she-wolf who brought Kaela her meals and supplies without a single word. She was no longer just a healer, she was a secret, a royal asset to be guarded and isolated. The paranoia of the king radiated outwards, seeping into the stone walls. Valerius began a silent, vicious purge. Kaela would hear whispers of a high-ranking guard captain being suddenly reassigned to a remote border patrol, or a council member abruptly retiring due to ill health. The king was cutting out any potential infection with a surgeon's cold precision, but he still hadn't found the source. The traitor was clever, buried deep within the fortress's heart. Kaela felt their unseen eyes on her constantly. Twice, she found her workroom door slightly ajar when she was certain she had closed it. Once, a crucial distillation for her antidote was mysteriously spoiled. The flask cracked as if by a sudden change in temperature, forcing her to start the delicate process all over again. These were not accidents. They were warnings. The traitor knew she was close to a cure, and they were trying to stop her. Her only solace was in her work. She spent nearly 20 hours a day in her laboratory, surrounded by bubbling alembics and the rich, earthy smells of her craft. The challenge of the antidote was immense, a complex puzzle of alchemy and herbal lore that consumed her every waking thought. She was close, she could feel it, but one final, stabilizing component eluded her. One night, driven by exhaustion, she fell asleep at her workbench, her head pillowed on an ancient tome. She was awoken hours later by a subtle change in the room. A thick fur cloak had been draped over her shoulders, chasing away the deep chill of the stone. A tray with fresh bread, cheese, and a steaming mug of spiced tea sat on the edge of her table. There was no sign of who had left it, but the air still held the faint, lingering scent of pine and winter storms. Valerius. The gesture was so at odds with the ruthless tyrant he was known to be that it left her breathless. He was watching her. Not just as a guard watches a prisoner, but as something else. He had seen her exhaustion, had seen her shiver in her sleep, and had acted. It was a silent, almost grudging admission of care. In that moment, surrounded by the cold, oppressive stone of his fortress, Kaela felt a flicker of something she had not felt since she was taken from her home, a sense of safety. It was a terrifying, confusing, and undeniably potent feeling, and it was tied to the most dangerous man she had ever known. Chapter 8, The Man Beneath the Crown. The small, silent acts of care continued. A fresh log would be added to her workroom fire in the dead of night. A rare herb she had only mused about needing would appear on her table the next morning. Kaela never saw him, but she always felt his presence, a powerful, watchful guardian in the shadows. This silent communication began to slowly erode the walls she had built around her heart. She was a healer, she saw the good and the bad in people. and she was beginning to see that beneath the ruthless king was a man drowning in a grief so profound he could only express himself through power and control. Her work on the antidote had reached a critical impasse. She needed a binding agent, something pure and vital enough to neutralize the silver in the poison without harming the Luna. Standard reagents were too weak, magical ones were too volatile. She paced her laboratory, her mind a whirlwind of frustration, the weight of her village pressing down on her. Late one night, the door to her workroom opened. It was Valerius. He did not speak, but walked to the long table, placing a small, ornate silver dagger upon it. It was ancient, the hilt carved in the shape of a snarling wolf, its eyes inlaid with chips of obsidian. "This is the blade of the first king," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It was forged in dragon's breath and quenched in the heart of a fallen star. It is the oldest and most powerful artifact of my bloodline." Kaela stared at it, confused. "My lord, I am a healer, not an assassin. I have no use for a weapon." "You are not looking deep enough," he replied, his stormy eyes intense. He drew the blade across the palm of his own hand, a line of startlingly red blood welling up. He did not flinch. He let a single drop fall into a clean crystal beaker on her table. The blood did not dissipate. It held its shape, shimmering with a faint, internal light. "The magic is not in the blade. It is in the blood of the Alpha King. My blood. It is a font of pure life essence. Perhaps it is the binding agent you seek." Kaela was speechless. He was offering her his own life force, a part of himself, to save his mate. It was the most profound act of trust, of vulnerability, she had ever witnessed. It laid bare the depth of his love for the Luna, a love so powerful he would unmake his own ancient laws and offer his sacred blood to a human he had kidnapped. She took the beaker, her fingers trembling as they brushed against his. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth and raw power that shot up her arm. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the world fell away. There was no king, no prisoner, no fortress. There were only two souls, bound by a desperate hope in a darkened room. She saw not the ruthless tyrant, but the mate, the protector, the man. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty that shook her to her core, that she was no longer afraid of him. Chapter 9. The First Thaw. With the king's blood, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The shimmering, vital drop acted as the perfect catalyst, allowing the herbal components of the antidote to bind together into a stable, potent solution. It glowed with a soft, golden light, the finished potion a testament to the strange and powerful alliance forged between the human healer and the Lycan King. It was ready. The air in the Luna's chamber was thick with tension. Kaela stood by the bedside, a single dose of the golden liquid held in a small crystal vial. Valerius stood on the other side of the bed, a statue carved from shadow and stone, his face an unreadable mask, but the frantic, desperate hope in his eyes was a naked flame. The guards, the silent she-wolf, even the fortress itself seemed to hold its breath. Kaela gently lifted the Luna's head and tipped the vial, letting the precious liquid slide past her pale lips. For a moment, nothing happened. The Luna remained as still and silent as she had been for weeks. Kaela's heart sank. Had she failed? Had it all been for nothing? Valerius's hand clenched into a fist at his side, the sound of his knuckles cracking loud in the silent room. Then, a soft sigh escaped the Luna's lips. It was the barest whisper of a sound, but to the two people at her bedside, it was a thunderclap. A faint flush of color, the delicate pink of a sunrise, crept into her cheeks. The shimmering silver dust on her skin seemed to recede, paling in intensity. She did not wake, but the rigid stillness of her slumber softened, her body relaxing into a true, healing sleep for the first time in over a month. A ragged breath escaped Valerius's lips, a sound of such profound, gut-wrenching relief that it was almost a sob. He looked at Kaela, his stormy eyes shining with an emotion she could not name. It was gratitude, awe and something deeper, something fiercely protective that was now aimed squarely at her. "It is not a full cure," Kaela cautioned, her own voice shaky with relief. "The poison is woven deep into her system. She will need a dose every day for a week to purge it completely. But the tide has turned. She will live." He gave a single, sharp nod, unable to speak. He reached across the bed, his large, calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the Luna's arm. His touch was warm and firm, a silent acknowledgement of their victory, a binding of their pact. It was a gesture of a partner, an equal. In that moment, Kaela knew that her role in this fortress had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just the king's prisoner. She was his hope. And that, she realized with a jolt, made her a more significant threat to the traitor than ever before. Chapter 10. The Serpent Strikes. The Luna's recovery, though slow, was undeniable. Each day, with each dose of the antidote, a little more life returned to her. Color bloomed in her cheeks, her breathing deepened, and the silver dust receded like a vanquished frost. The oppressive gloom that had held the Obsidian Spire in its grip began to lift, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. The king's demeanor softened, the hard edges of his grief blunted by relief. He spent hours at his mate's bedside, simply watching her sleep, but he also sought out Kaela's company. He would appear in her workroom, not with demands, but with questions about her home, her healing, her life. He listened with an unnerving intensity, as if memorizing the details of her soul. The balance of power between them had shifted into something far more complex and dangerous than a simple captor and captive relationship. This newfound hope made the traitor desperate. Their window of opportunity was closing. The attack came on the fifth night. Kaela was returning to her chambers from the laboratory, weary but satisfied with the day's progress. The corridors were quiet, the torchlight casting long, dancing shadows. As she passed a darkened alcove, a hand shot out, clamping over her mouth, and she was dragged into the blackness. Panic flared, hot and immediate. She was slammed against the cold stone wall, the air knocked from her lungs. A voice, a cultured, familiar hiss, spoke directly into her ear. "You have been a thorn in my side for too long, little healer." Her eyes, adjusting to the dark, made out the face of her attacker. It was not a guard or a rogue. It was Lord Malachi, the king's most trusted advisor, a slender, silver-haired Lycan with sharp, intelligent features and a reputation for quiet counsel. He had always been polite, even kind to her. He was also the one who had overseen the diplomatic gifts from the Shadowfen pack. The Luna's death was meant to be a tragedy, not a puzzle for a human to solve, he snarled, his polite mask stripped away to reveal the viper beneath. He pressed the point of a small, poisoned dagger against her throat. "The king is lost in his grief. The Shadowfen will strike, and I will be here to save the kingdom from the chaos, to take the throne that should have been mine. But first, the cure must be destroyed. And so must its creator." Kaela's mind raced. She couldn't scream. She couldn't fight him physically. He was an alpha, his strength overwhelming. She had only her wits. "Kill me, and the Luna dies," she managed to say, her voice muffled by his hand. "The antidote is not finished. There is one final ingredient, known only to me. Without it, the doses you have will turn to poison in her veins by morning." It was a complete and utter lie, a desperate gamble born of sheer terror. But Malachi hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Could he risk it? His entire plan hinged on the king being weakened by the Luna's death. A miraculous recovery followed by a sudden, inexplicable relapse would cast suspicion everywhere. The hesitation was all she needed. With a surge of adrenaline, she stomped her heel down hard on his instep. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. She tore free, stumbling out of the alcove and into the torchlight of the main corridor, screaming one single desperate word. Valerius. Chapter 11. The Winter Storm Unleashed. Her scream, raw and desperate, echoed through the stone corridors, a human sound in a world of Lycan silence. It was answered almost instantly. A sound like a thunderclap ripped through the fortress as the doors to the king's study, 2 corridors away, were blasted off their hinges. It was followed by a roar, a sound of such primal, possessive fury that the very stones seemed to vibrate with it. It was not the roar of a king, it was the roar of a male whose mate was threatened. Malachi's moment of hesitation evaporated, replaced by cold, murderous intent. He lunged for Kaela, the poisoned dagger aimed at her heart. She scrambled backward, tripping over the hem of her own dress, her life flashing before her eyes. But she never hit the floor. A blur of black and silver intercepted Malachi mid-lunge, a force of pure, untamed rage. Valerius, in his half-shifted form, was a nightmare of claws and fangs. His stormy eyes glowed with an internal silver light, and the snarl that tore from his throat was the sound of death itself. He wasn't the king anymore, he was the apex predator, and someone had dared to touch what was his. He slammed Malachi into the opposite wall with a sickening crunch of stone and bone. The dagger clattered to the floor. The fight, if it could be called that, was over in seconds. Malachi was a cunning politician, a snake, but Valerius was a warrior king, forged in the crucible of 100 battles. There was no contest. Valerius's claws, long and sharp as obsidian shards, were at Malachi's throat before the traitor could even begin to shift. "You dare," Valerius snarled, his voice a guttural growl that barely sounded human. "You dare touch her." The possessive fury in his words was absolute, leaving no room for misinterpretation. He wasn't just angry that Malachi had tried to sabotage the cure, he was enraged that he had laid hands on Kaela. Kaela, breathless and trembling, pushed herself to her feet. The corridor was suddenly filled with the heavy tread of the Obsidian Guard, drawn by the commotion. They stopped dead, their professional calm shattered by the scene before them, their king, radiating a murderous aura unlike any they had ever seen, holding his most trusted advisor at claw point. Valerius did not look at them. His glowing eyes were locked on Kaela, scanning her for any injury, any sign of harm. His rage was a storm, but his gaze on her was a pinpoint of focus in the heart of the hurricane. "Are you hurt?" he growled. She shook her head, unable to find her voice. He turned his attention back to the whimpering, terrified traitor pinned against the wall. He did not kill him. Death was too quick, too merciful a punishment. "Take this filth to the deepest cell in the dungeons," he commanded the guards, his voice dripping with venom. "He will beg for the end long before I grant it to him." As the guards hauled the broken and exposed traitor away, Valerius's monstrous form began to recede. The claws shortened, the fangs retracted. He was a king once more, but the winter storm still raged in his eyes. He crossed the corridor in 2 long strides and stopped in front of Kaela. Without a word, he reached out, his large, powerful hands gently cupping her face. His thumbs brushed against her cheeks, his touch surprisingly tender as he searched her eyes, reassuring himself that she was truly unharmed. The fortress, the guards, the world, it all faded away. In that moment, there was only the raw, unspoken truth that had been laid bare by the violence. He would unmake the world to keep her safe. Chapter 12. The Shifting Allegiance. The aftermath of Malachi's treachery sent shockwaves through the Obsidian Spire. The snake had been cut from the garden, but the venom of his betrayal lingered. The king's trust in his court was shattered. The silent, vicious purge he had begun was now an open, ruthless cleansing. Every lord, every captain, every steward who had ever shown loyalty to Malachi was interrogated and exiled. The fortress was locked down, its gates sealed. The kingdom was a fist, clenched tight around its wounded heart. In the midst of this turmoil, Kaela's world shrank to 2 places, the Luna's chambers and the king's shadow. Valerius was now her constant guardian. He would not let her out of his sight. She would wake in the pre-dawn hours to find him sitting in a chair by her workroom fire, watching her sleep. He escorted her personally to and from the Luna's chambers. He had her meals brought to his own solar, and they would eat in a charged heavy silence, the unspoken tension between them a living entity in the room. The fear she had once felt for him had been replaced by a bewildering and potent cocktail of emotions. She was a healer, a nurturer. And the king, for all his power, was wounded. She saw the exhaustion behind his eyes, the immense weight of the crown and the near loss of his mate. She found herself wanting to soothe his furrowed brow, to offer a word of comfort, to be the calm in his personal storm. It was a dangerous, impossible impulse. He was a Lycan king, and she was a human healer. He was mated, and she was his prisoner. But was she still a prisoner? The gods no longer treated her as one. They bowed to her now, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. She was the human who had saved their Luna and earned the king's personal, terrifying protection. She could, she realized, probably ask for anything and it would be granted. Anything except her freedom. Because leaving was now the one thing Valerius would never allow. One evening, as they sat in his solar, the silence was broken by the king himself. "You lied to him," he said, his voice a low rumble. He stared into the fire, not at her. There is no final ingredient for the antidote, is there? Kaela's heart skipped a beat. No, she admitted softly. It was a gamble. It was all I could think of. A low sound, like the shift of stones, came from his chest. It took her a moment to realize it was a humorless chuckle. You faced down a traitorous alpha with a lie as your only weapon. He finally turned his head, his storm-gray eyes meeting hers in the flickering firelight. You are not a sheep, Kaela of Heatherglen. You are a lioness in a field of flowers. The raw admiration in his voice did more to unravel her composure than any threat or command ever had. He did not see her as a fragile human, a tool to be used. He saw her as an equal, a spirit as fierce and unyielding as his own. And in the face of that recognition, Kaela felt her own carefully constructed walls begin to crumble, leaving her heart dangerously, terrifyingly exposed. Chapter 13. The Queen Awakens. On the 7th day, after the final dose of the antidote had been administered, the Luna opened her eyes. Her eyes were a startling, vibrant blue, the color of a clear summer sky. They blinked slowly, taking in the ornate canopy of her bed, the heavy tapestries on the wall, and finally, the two figures standing at her bedside. Her gaze fell first on Valerius, and a smile of such pure, profound love graced her lips that it lit up the entire room. "My love," she whispered, her voice weak but clear. Valerius's composure finally broke. He sank to his knees by the bed, taking her hand in both of his and pressing it to his forehead. A single, shuddering sigh of relief and gratitude escaped him, the sound of a man who had walked through the deepest circle of hell and emerged into the light. Then, the Luna's bright blue eyes shifted, landing on Kaela. She studied the human healer for a long moment, her expression curious and kind. "You are the one," she said softly. "I felt you. A warmth. A green and growing light, fighting back the cold." Kaela, overwhelmed, could only curtsy. "I am glad to see you well, Your Majesty." The Luna's name was Seraphina, a name that meant fire and light, and it suited her perfectly. In the days that followed, as her strength returned, she filled the cold stone fortress with a warmth it had never known. She requested music in the halls, had the heavy, dark drapes thrown open to let in the sun, and her laughter became a common and welcome sound. She was the kingdom's heart, and with her recovery, the Obsidian Spire began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. She treated Kaela not as a servant, but as a friend and savior. She would summon her for long talks, asking about her life in Heatherglen, her knowledge of herbs, and her family. During these conversations, Kaela felt a profound and aching homesickness, a longing for the simple, peaceful life that had been stolen from her. But she also saw the deep and unwavering bond between the king and his Luna. Their love was the bedrock upon which the kingdom was built. They were two halves of a whole, his strength her shield, and her light his anchor. To see them together was to understand the very meaning of the word mate. And with that understanding came a deep, crushing finality. Whatever strange, unspoken connection she had forged with the king in the darkness of his grief was an illusion. He belonged to another. She was, and always would be, an outsider. The knowledge settled in her heart like a cold, smooth stone, a permanent and painful weight. Chapter 14. The Price of a Life. With the Luna recovered and the traitor imprisoned, a semblance of normality returned to the court. The gates were reopened, and a formal summons was sent to the lords of the Shadowfen Pack. They were to present themselves before the Lycan King to answer for their act of war. Their destruction was a foregone conclusion. For Kaela, it was time to go home. She sought out the king, finding him on the high battlements, staring out at the jagged peaks of the mountains that bordered his kingdom. The wind was fierce, whipping his black cloak around him, but he stood unmoving, a part of the stone itself. "My lord," she began, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "The Luna is well. Your enemies are known to you. My task is complete. I wish to return to my village." Valerius did not turn. For a long time, he was silent, and Kaela's heart began to pound with a familiar dread. "No," he said finally, the word a flat, hard stone dropped into the wind. Kaela felt a cold fury mix with her disbelief. "You gave your word," she said, her voice rising. "My compliance was the price for my village's safety. I have held up my end of the bargain. I have saved your queen. I have earned my freedom. You have earned more than freedom, he said, finally turning to face her. The winter storm was back in his eyes, but it was a different kind of storm now, not of grief, but of a cold, possessive certainty. You have earned a place of honor in this kingdom. I am creating a new position on my council. The royal healer. It will be yours. You will have riches, status, protection. Anything you desire. She stared at him, aghast. I don't desire riches or status. I desire my home. My life. The scent of heather in the meadows, the sound of my neighbor's laughter. You cannot keep me here. I can, he stated, and the sheer, absolute power in his voice was chilling. And I will. You are too valuable to let go, Kaela. Your knowledge, your skill. You are a weapon, and I will not relinquish such a weapon. He took a step closer, his immense form blocking out the sky. Besides, he added, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous murmur that sent a shiver down her spine, your presence here soothes the storm. It was a confession, wrapped in a command. He was admitting his need for her, his desire to keep her close, but he was doing it in the only way he knew how, through possession, through royal decree. He was offering her a gilded cage, more beautiful than the last, but a cage nonetheless. She had saved his kingdom, and her reward was a life sentence. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow, and the fragile hope she had nurtured for a return to her old life shattered into a million pieces at her feet. Chapter 15. An Unlikely Ally. Trapped and furious, Kaela retreated into a shell of cold, professional duty. She tended to the Luna, who was now strong enough to walk in the gardens, but she kept her conversations brief and her heart guarded. She avoided the king at all costs, the sight of him a painful reminder of her gilded imprisonment. But her misery did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, as she sat with the Luna in a sun-drenched courtyard, Queen Seraphina set aside her embroidery and looked at Kaela with her startlingly perceptive blue eyes. You are unhappy, the Luna stated gently. Kaela flinched, looking away. I am grateful for the king's generosity, your majesty. Are you? Seraphina asked, her voice soft but firm. Or do you feel like a prized bird he has captured and refuses to set free? The accuracy of the statement made Kaela's breath catch. The Luna saw everything. My mate. He is a storm, Seraphina continued, her gaze distant. He has ruled through strength for so long, he has forgotten other ways. He sees value, and he takes it. He feels a connection, and he binds it in chains, for fear of losing it. He does not mean to be cruel, but he is a king first and a man second. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. He owes you a debt that can never be repaid. I owe you that debt. He will not listen to your pleas, but he may yet listen to mine. Hope, a feeling Kaela had thought extinguished, flickered faintly in her chest. Could the Luna, the very reason for her captivity, also be the key to her freedom? What you did for me. It was more than just healing, Seraphina said, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. In my darkest moments, when I was drifting in that silver sleep, I was aware of two things. The cold emptiness of the poison, and a warm, steady light pushing it back. That light was you, Kaela. Valerius felt it too. It calmed the rage and fear that has been his constant companion since he took the throne. She reached out and placed her warm, gentle hand over Kaela's. He thinks he is keeping a weapon. He does not understand that he is caging the very light he has been searching for. A bell tolled, signaling the start of a council meeting. The Luna rose gracefully. Do not lose heart, Kaela of Heatherglen, she said, her blue eyes filled with a new resolve. The king may be the fist of this kingdom, but I am its heart. And the heart has a strength all its own. As the Luna walked away, her silver-blonde hair shimmering in the sun, Kaela watched her go, a strange and powerful alliance forming between them. She was no longer alone in her fight. She had an advocate, a friend, a queen. The bars of her cage, while still firmly in place, no longer seemed quite so unbreakable. Chapter 16. The Queen's Counsel. Queen Seraphina was true to her word. She became Kaela's quiet, persistent champion within the court of the king. She did not challenge her mate directly, that was not her way, but she was a master of subtle influence. She began by speaking of Heatherglen, weaving stories of the small, peaceful valley into her conversations with the king. She would ask Kaela for details of her home, of the festivals and the changing of the seasons, and then recount them to Valerius over their evening meal. She spoke of the villagers not as abstract subjects, but as people, describing the stooped shoulders of elder Thomas and the cheerful laugh of the baker's wife. She was painting a picture for her mate, reminding him that Kaela was not a solitary treasure to be hoarded, but the vital heart of a living community. Kaela saw the effect her stories had on the king. A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or understanding, would cross his face before being suppressed. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, the storm in his eyes churning with an internal conflict. He had saved his kingdom from a traitor, only to become a tyrant to its savior. The lords of the Shadowfen pack arrived, heads bowed in feigned submission. They were expecting a swift and brutal execution. Instead, Valerius shocked his entire court. He did not kill their lords. He crippled their pack, not with violence, but with treaties. He seized control of their most valuable trade routes and demanded a heavy annual tribute of grain and steel, a punishment that would ensure their weakness for generations without a single drop of blood being shed. When Kaela heard of this, she understood. It was a king's solution, but the thought process behind it was new. It was a strategic, long-term plan that valued stability over vengeance. It was the kind of counsel a wise, gentle queen would give. Seraphina was slowly tempering the iron of his rule. One evening, Seraphina made her boldest move. She found Kaela in the royal library and handed her a set of travel documents and a heavy pouch of gold. "These are for your village," the Luna said, her blue eyes shining. "A gift from the crown, to help them through the winter and to thank them for the loan of their healer." The words struck Kaela like a physical blow. For the loan. It was a deliberate, powerful choice of words. A loan implied a return. The king approved this? Kaela whispered, her hand trembling as she took the pouch. "He approved the gold," Seraphina said with a small, conspiratorial smile. "The phrasing was my own addition. Sometimes, my love just needs to be reminded of the honorable path. It is difficult for him to admit when he is wrong." This act of quiet defiance, of sheer, unwavering faith in her husband's better nature, was the most powerful move yet. Seraphina hadn't just given Kaela gold, she had given her a roadmap. She hadn't broken the cage, but she had handed Kaela the key, trusting her to know when and how to use it. Chapter 17, The Healer's Choice. The travel documents sat on Kaela's table, a tangible symbol of a future she desperately wanted. Yet, as the days turned into a week, she did not use them. A strange and unexpected reluctance had taken root in her heart. The Obsidian Spire was no longer the cold, terrifying fortress she had first entered. The Luna's warmth had permeated the stone, and the king's new, more measured rule had eased the oppressive fear that once defined it. She had found a purpose here, a place of respect. The castle's healers now sought her counsel, the guards bowed to her, and even the formidable king listened to her. She had brought life back to their queen and, in doing so, had healed a part of the kingdom itself. She also knew, with a certainty that was both frightening and undeniable, that the strange, intense connection she felt with Valerius had not faded. It had deepened, settling into a quiet rhythm of stolen glances, shared silences, and a profound, unspoken understanding. He was still a storm, but she had become the anchor that kept him from washing his own world away. His need for her was a palpable force, a silent gravity that held her in its orbit. To leave would be to return to a life of quiet simplicity. To stay would be to embrace a world of power, politics, and a dangerous, impossible man who was mated to another. The choice was made for her. A rider arrived from the eastern territories, his horse lathered, his face pale with panic. A new, virulent strain of blood fever, immune to all known Lycan remedies, was sweeping through the mining settlements. It was highly contagious and brutally swift. They were losing dozens a day. The king's council was in an uproar, the Lycan healers admitting their defeat. All eyes turned to Kaela. She was their only hope. Valerius sent for her, his face a grim mask of command. "You will travel east," he ordered, the map of the afflicted region spread before him. "You will take whatever supplies you need. You will find a cure." It was a command, but Kaela heard the plea beneath it. He was not ordering his prisoner, He was begging the only person he trusted to save his people. And as she looked at him, at the immense weight of 1,000 dying subjects on his shoulders, she knew she could not refuse. The simple healer from Heatherglen had the fate of the Lycan kingdom resting, once again, in her hands. She pushed the travel documents for her village to the back of a drawer. Her home would have to wait. Chapter 18. In the Heart of the Plague. The eastern settlements were a vision of hell. The air was thick with the metallic scent of sickness and the smoke of funerary pyres that burned day and night. Kaela, escorted by a detachment of the Obsidian Guard, moved through the makeshift infirmaries, her face a mask of calm professionalism that belied the horror in her heart. The blood fever was worse than she could have imagined. It ravaged the strong Lycan bodies, turning their supernatural healing abilities against them. She worked tirelessly, barely sleeping, her mind a frantic library of herbal knowledge as she tested combinations, seeking a weakness in the plague's armor. On the third day, when she was near collapse from exhaustion, a rider arrived from the capital. It was not a messenger. It was the king. Valerius strode into the chaotic infirmary, his immense presence silencing the groans of the sick and the frantic shouts of the attendants. He was dressed not in his royal finery, but in practical leather armor. His eyes, stormy and intense, found her immediately through the haze of smoke and misery. He did not speak. He walked to her, took the diagnostic tools from her trembling, exhausted hands, and gently pushed her down onto a crate. He pressed a water skin to her lips. "Drink," he commanded, his voice a low growl that held no room for argument. He had followed her. He had left his fortress, his council, his recovering mate, and had ridden for 2 days straight to be here. Not to command, not to inspect, but to be with her. For the next week, they worked side by side. The ruthless Lycan King became her assistant. He ground herbs with a stone pestle, his massive hands surprisingly deft. He held down feverish, delirious warriors while she administered remedies. He stood guard over her while she slept for brief, precious hours, his presence an impenetrable shield against the chaos and death that surrounded them. They spoke little, their communication pared down to the essentials of their work. But in the crucible of the plague, their bond was forged anew, stripped of its titles and its complexities. He was no longer a king, and she was no longer his prisoner. They were two warriors fighting a common enemy, a team bound by a desperate purpose and a deep, mutual respect. In the heart of death and despair, Kaela found herself feeling more alive, more truly herself, than ever before. She was not just a healer. She was a leader, a partner, a force to be reckoned with. And the king, for the first time, was not alone in his fight. Chapter 19. The King's Surrender. On the 8th day, she found it. A rare, deep earth fungus, combined with the bark of the ironwood tree and administered as a heated poultice, not an elixir. It didn't fight the fever head-on, it supported the Lycan's own healing, calming it, guiding it, allowing it to overcome the disease. It was a healer's solution, one of harmony, not of war. The tide turned. The death toll fell, then stopped. The sick began to recover. A fragile, exhausted wave of relief washed over the settlements. They had won. That night, Kaela and Valerius stood on a hillside overlooking the valley. The funerary pyres had been extinguished, and for the first time in weeks, the air was clean and cool, filled only with the scent of pine and the promise of a future. "You have saved them," Valerius said, his voice heavy with an emotion she couldn't decipher. "Again, you have saved my people." "We saved them," she corrected softly. He turned to face her in the moonlight. The hard lines of his face were softened, the storm in his eyes calmed to a deep, quiet gray. "When Malachi held that blade to your throat," he began, his voice a low, raw confession, "and you screamed my name. The thought of losing you was a pain sharper than any blade. It was a wound deeper than the one I felt when I thought I was losing my mate." Kaela's breath hitched. "Seraphina is my mate," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "She is the heart of my kingdom. I love her. She is a part of my soul. But you—" He took a hesitant step closer, his hand coming up as if to touch her face before falling back to his side. "You are the anchor to the man inside the king. You are the stillness in my storm. I thought I could command you, possess you, keep you like a treasure. I was a fool. A cage, no matter how gilded, cannot hold the sun." He reached inside his tunic and pulled out the travel documents she had left behind. He held them out to her. "Your village is safe. Your home is waiting. You are free, Kaela." His voice broke on the final word. It was the sound of a king surrendering his most prized possession, the sound of a man letting go of the one thing he needed most. Go home. This was it. The moment she had fought for, longed for, dreamed of. Freedom. But as she looked at the documents in his hand, and then at the raw, agonizing vulnerability on the face of the most powerful man she had ever known, she felt no triumph. Only a deep, hollow ache. She had come here to fight a monster and had instead found a man. A man she had, against all odds, come to care for, to respect, and to understand. A man who was, in this moment, breaking his own heart for her. Chapter 20, The Healer's Home. Kaela did not take the documents. Instead, she closed the distance between them and gently placed her hand over his heart. She could feel the frantic, powerful beat beneath his leather armor. "You once told me I was a lioness in a field of flowers," she said, her voice soft but sure in the quiet night. "A lioness does not belong in a cage. But she does not belong in a quiet field either. She belongs where she is needed most. Where she can protect her pride." Valerius stared down at her, his stormy eyes wide with a dawning, disbelieving hope. "My home is not a place, Valerius," she continued, speaking the truth that had been growing in her heart for weeks. "It is a purpose. I am a healer. And my place is here, where sickness and shadows threaten the people I have come to care for. My place is with the queen who calls me friend, and with the king who needs an anchor for his storm." A single tear, a startling drop of silver in the moonlight, traced a path down his scarred cheek. He covered her hand with his own, his touch no longer a claim of possession, but a gesture of profound, reverent gratitude. Kaela never returned to Heatherglen to live, though she visited often, bringing with her the wealth and protection of the crown. Her old life was a cherished memory, but her new life was a vibrant, challenging reality. She became the first royal healer, her position on the council second only to the queen. She and Seraphina became an unstoppable force of compassion and wisdom, their combined counsel tempering the king's iron rule into a new age of prosperity and justice for all. Lycan, human, Omega, and Alpha alike. Her relationship with Valerius was never defined by a title. It was something deeper, more complex. He was the king, and she was his most trusted advisor. He was mated to his queen, and Kaela respected that bond with every fiber of her being. But in the quiet moments, in a shared look across a council table, a silent walk on the battlements, a partnership in the face of a new crisis, they were simply Valerius and Kaela. The storm and the stillness. The fist and the heart of a kingdom they had saved together. She was never a queen, and she was never his mate. But she was his anchor, his partner, and his most profound peace. And in the heart of the ruthless Lycan King's fortress, the healer from Heatherglen had finally truly found her home.